In this video I'm going to show you how you can use the Blender application template, FluidDesigner for 3D printing, to create pendants and earrings using arrays. So we're assuming that you've got Blender and you've uploaded our application to it, and what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Objects library, and I'm going to go to Jewelry Pendants folder. Now there's quite a lot of objects in my folder here, and as it stands they don't look like very much, but I mean it just depends how you actually use these objects. So I'm going to try this one here, this C-wire pattern, and if I just click OK, and I'm just scrolling the mouse towards me now and move the mouse outside of the box and click, and what that does is just places it in the center of the screen. I've just switch screencast keys on there, that's all I did. So we've got that object in the middle of the screen. Now if I go into edit mode by pressing the tab key on the keyboard, I can see that this is quite chunky, this object. What that means is it's not a NURBS curve, and I like to work with NURBS curves. So if you press A on the keyboard until you get all the control points selected, and if you press the space bar and type set spline type, you can always set it to NURBS. And over in the left hand panel here you can change it from Bezier, which gives you this chunky style, and poly also, but a more rounded style and a better style to work with is NURBS. So that's how you can switch objects to NURBS. So if we come out of edit mode now and just go to view and top view, now if I just open the properties panel over here, you'll see my default cross section is 1:2, which we normally have, and what we've also got with this object are some modifiers, and both these modifiers here for set the columns and set the rows are array modifiers. So if I open up the first one, what this allows me to do is replicate the pattern. What this is just an array modifier, and I can set the count there to 12, 11, 10, etc. Now normally you'd want it closed. Now what you've got to be very careful of with these array modifiers is you don't go to 13, 14, 15. 13, 14 and 15 means you're putting objects on top of other objects. You can't do that. You'll have real problems when you run it through NetFab Basic if you do that, and it will fail. So make sure that when you do the count you just fill the shape up. So in this case with 7 objects. Now you could change the relative count over here, and as you can see that changes the pattern. Now there's a number of ways of changing this pattern. I could pull the original object down, for example, and if I do Control A on my keyboard and apply the location, notice the pattern resets. Now when I'm doing Control A, what I'm doing is resetting this location here. So if I just move it back up, you can see it says 4 millimeters over here. If I do Control A and apply the location, note that sets it back to 0, and that's quite an important feature, something that you've got to do quite often in FluidDesigner when you're changing rotation and location. Alright, so I mean I could also rotate my objects, and again you can see once I do that, if I do Control A and apply the rotation, I'll end up with a different pattern. So you can play around with the modifiers, changing the offset. You can play around with the count, and you can play around with location and rotation, and you'll get different patterns each time. Now here I've got a count of 12. That's because an angular rotation modifier is applied here. Now you can't actually adjust that in this instance, you'd have to recreate it, and the way that that's created is if you go to add empty, it's a plain axis empty, and if I select that and change, I'm just going to change the name of it from empty to object offset angular, spelled angular with 2 U's, I shouldn't really have done that, And if I set the Z value to, let's say, 45 degrees and go back to my pattern now and go to modifiers, I've got this new object here. I've called it object offset because that's what it is. The box is ticked there and it's angular. And when I do that, notice the pattern changes. Now if I change my count down now and reduce it down, notice my count is now different. My count this time stops at 8. The count is dictated by the object offset angle here. So if I change this to 90 degrees, 4 times 90 is 360. And if I go to my wire pattern again, I need to set my count down at 4. Anything less than 4 and the circle won't be completed. Anything more than 4 and there'll be overlap and you won't be able to print this object. Now I'm going to set this offset back to 45 and set my pattern back to 8. And I want to put a gem in the middle there, so I'm just going to pull it down slightly and do Control A on the keyboard and apply the location again, and that gives me a bit of a gap in the middle there. Now that grid is about 20 mil by 20 mil, so this object's a little bit bigger than I want if this is going to be a pendant. So if I go into edit mode now and highlight all the control points, and if I do S for scale, now you must scale in edit mode, don't do it in normal mode, otherwise you will affect the thickness of this. At the moment the thickness is controlled by this bevel object here, it's 1 by 2, and my Z value is still 2 millimeters there. If you scale that any other way than what I've just shown you, that won't work. Okay, so if you're once you're happy with a pattern, what you can do is convert this to a mesh. So if you go to Tools, Object Tools and convert it to a mesh, then what you should do is go to Origin to the geometry. So what that will do is it will put this yellow dot in the very center of this new object. It was at the center of the original letter C. It's now at the center of the new object. And if I now go to Tool, Cursor Tools and Snap Selection to Cursor, what that will do is it will place my pattern exactly in the middle of the screen. Now what I want to do is I want to put a circle around this, and if I just go to Add Curve and NURBS Circle, and if I just change the radius, increase the radius, and I'm just dragging it with the mouse in the Properties panel on the left, just get it so that it's just outside, and with the cursor, with the cursor selected, if I open up the Properties panel, if I select 1 by 2 here as the bevel object, that outside will be exactly the same as the pattern on the inside there. And notice I've got some overlap at the edges there, so that should print as a solid object. Now to make it as a pendant, I just need to add another object from my object library, and I'm going to go to the Findings, Jewelry Findings one, and I'm just basically going to add a ring at the top with an internal diameter of 2.5 millimeters, and I can just position that at the top there. Notice that the cross section of that is slightly different, but if I hold down the Shift key and highlight the circle around the pendant, if I go to Tools, Object Tools and Join, that ring at the top will take on the same dimensions as my pendant. And that's it. That's how you could actually create a pendant using these patterns. If you've got Jewel Craft on your system, you could add a gem to this. So I'm just going to change it to a emerald one so you can see it in green. And if I probably select 4 millimeters as the diameter, no, a bit more. Okay, so I could put a gem there. And if I just pull the gem up, just probably need to switch off the snap. I just position my gem appropriately and then go to jeweling and set some prongs. You'll notice that I've got some prongs attached there. Probably just need to rotate it so that the prongs are in the right sort of place on the pendant. So that's how you could add a gem as well. Okay, so thank you for watching this video.